What if a single mundane act, a waitress reaching to clear a water glass, was the butterfly wing that could summon a hurricane, leveling a billionaire's carefully constructed world? For 28 agonizing years, Eleanor Sterling, the matriarch of a Chicago real estate empire, existed in the perpetual gray twilight of mourning for a daughter who had vanished into the night like a whisper of smoke. Her son Edward, a man who built skyscrapers and reshaped the city's skyline, had built his own internal fortress of cold, hard logic to entomb the pain and the guilt. But on a blustery Thursday evening, in a restaurant perched atop the city, a cathedral of glass and steel humming with the quiet chatter of the elite, time fractured. An old woman's hand, frail but with a grip of astonishing power, shot out and clamped onto a young waitress's arm. A voice, thin and trembling, sliced through the ambiance. "You have my daughter's eyes." And in that moment, the billionaire magnate beside her gasped as if struck, his face contorting in a mask of forgotten horror. He collapsed, and a secret, buried under 3 decades of concrete and sorrow, began to claw its way into the light. Clara Jenkins measured her life in the steady, predictable rhythms of the service industry. The precise fold of a napkin, the satisfying weight of a full coffee pot, the low murmur of a satisfied customer. These were the constants in a life defined by instability. At 27, she was a professional, a ghost in the stark black uniform of The Pinnacle, a restaurant so exclusive its windows looked down on the rest of Chicago as if from another world. Her clients were the city's titans, men and women who debated billion-dollar deals over appetizers that cost more than her weekly groceries. Clara was exceptionally good at her job, efficient, preternaturally observant, and most importantly, invisible. Invisibility was her shield, her camouflage in a world she served but could never inhabit. On this particular Thursday, the dinner service was a maelstrom of controlled elegance. Clara moved through it like a seasoned dancer, her tray a silent partner. She presented the wine at table 6, took a complex dietary order from table 14, and then began her approach to table 9, the most coveted booth in the house, a sweeping corner panorama occupied by an elderly woman of breathtaking, severe grace, and a man whose tailored suit seemed woven from shadows and power. They were the Sterlings. Even a waitress knew that name. Edward Sterling was less a man and more a force of nature, a developer who didn't just build towers but conquered the sky itself. His face, handsome but etched with a permanent, impatient severity, was a regular feature in profiles of the nation's most powerful people. His mother, Eleanor, was the dynasty's quiet, sorrowful queen, a figure of old Chicago money and whispered tragedy. Clara approached with her practiced, unobtrusive smile. "Good evening. Is there anything else I can bring for you?" Edward didn't lift his eyes from his phone, his thumb swiping with a dismissive speed that communicated her utter irrelevance. He emitted a low grunt that she was meant to interpret as a negative. It was Eleanor who looked up. Her gaze was usually distant, her pale, violet-blue eyes clouded with a melancholy that seemed as much a part of her as the legendary sterling sapphires at her throat. Her eyes drifted over Clara's face, a flicker of polite acknowledgement, and then they froze. It was a bizarre, jarring moment. The sophisticated hum of the restaurant seemed to warp and fade, replaced by a roaring in Clara's ears. Eleanor Sterling's eyes, no longer veiled by sorrow, sharpened with a shocking, primal intensity that made the air in Clara's lungs feel thin. The old woman leaned forward, her perfectly manicured fingers, adorned with rings of stunning value, gripping the white linen of the tablecloth. Her lips parted, a word forming, then dying unspoken. "Ma'am?" Clara asked, a tremor of profound unease prickling her skin. She was used to being a phantom, not the object of such a piercing, soul-bearing stare. Edward finally glanced up, his brow furrowed with annoyance at the interruption. "Mother, what is it? The car is waiting." But Eleanor didn't hear him. Her entire universe had contracted to the space between her and the waitress. She saw the way a lock of chestnut hair fell across Clara's forehead, the stubborn set of her chin, the small, crescent-shaped scar just below her left collarbone, a faint silver line against her skin. But it was the eyes that held her captive, that reached into her chest and squeezed her heart. They were a deep, complex shade of green, not the color of jade or emerald, but of a forest after a storm, flecked with gold and a deep shadowy gray. They were eyes that held both a fierce resilience and a profound secret sorrow. They were her daughter's eyes. Catherine. The name was a ghost on Eleanor's lips, a sound so fragile Clara wasn't sure she'd heard it at all. Before Clara could react, could even breathe, Eleanor's hand shot across the table with the speed of a striking snake. Her fingers, cool and surprisingly strong, closed around Clara's forearm. The contact was an electric shock, a current of 30 years of grief and longing arcing between them. "You!" Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling with a terrifying fusion of disbelief and ferocious, impossible hope. "You have my daughter's eyes." The declaration detonated in the quiet air. It was a bizarre, insane statement. Conversations at nearby tables faltered. Diners turned to stare. Clara stood paralyzed, the water pitcher in her other hand suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. She tried to pull her arm back, but the old woman's grip was like a manacle, her desperation giving her inhuman strength. "Mother, what the hell are you doing?" Edward's voice was a whip crack. "Let her go. You're making a spectacle." He rose from his seat, his towering presence casting a shadow that seemed to chill the air around the table. But as his gaze swung from his mother's frantic, tear-streaked face to the waitress's shocked one, something inside him shattered. For the first time, he truly looked at the young woman. He saw the eyes his mother was raving about. He saw the familiar shape of her face, the almost imperceptible scar, and a memory he had sealed away in a lead-lined vault for 28 years, burst free with devastating force. A memory of his sister Catherine in the garden of their Lake Forest estate, laughing, a tiny scratch on her collarbone from a climbing rose, her forest-green eyes sparkling with a defiant, untamable light he could never comprehend. The blood drained from his face. The impregnable walls he had built around his heart for a quarter of a century didn't just crumble, they were obliterated. The past wasn't dead and buried. It was standing right in front of him, wearing a waitress's uniform and holding a water pitcher. "Catherine," he echoed his mother's whisper, but his was hollow, stripped of all emotion save for a deep, cavernous well of guilt. His breath hitched. His hand fumbled to his chest, clutching at the expensive silk of his tie. The room began to pitch and yaw, the edges of his vision blurring into a vortex of distorted light and sound. The last thing he saw was Clara's face, a living, breathing mirror of his lost sister, her eyes wide with a fear and confusion that perfectly reflected his own. Then with a choked, guttural gasp, Edward Sterling, the unbreakable titan of Chicago real estate, collapsed. He crumpled to the floor like a demolished building, a marionette with its strings cut, sending fine china and crystal scattering across the polished floor in a cacophony of destruction. The restaurant erupted into chaos. Eleanor screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish, and Clara Jenkins stood motionless, her arm still trapped in the old woman's grip, her simple, rhythmic life shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. The shriek from Eleanor Sterling was a piercing wail that cut through the symphony of gasps, scraping chairs, and shattering glass. In what felt like seconds, the restaurant's professional veneer dissolved, replaced by a raw, primal panic. Paramedics, summoned with the speed and efficiency that money commands, swarmed the scene, their movements sharp and urgent. They worked on the inert form of Edward Sterling, shouting medical jargon that was as alien to Clara as the idea that a simple glance from her could fell a titan of industry. She was finally mercifully released from Eleanor's grasp as a man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit materialized and gently guided the weeping matriarch away. He spoke in low, soothing tones, but Eleanor's gaze remained locked on Clara, a burning, desperate stare that followed her even as she was escorted toward a private exit. Clara stumbled back, her shoulder bumping against a decorative pillar, her mind a maelstrom of confusion. She was no longer invisible. She was the epicenter of a disaster she couldn't comprehend. The police arrived. Then the man in the suit reappeared. He introduced himself as Benjamin Carter, chief counsel for the Sterling Corporation. He had calm, intelligent gray eyes that seemed to see everything, and a mouth that looked as though it had been drawn with a ruler. He asked her questions in a clipped, professional tone that brooked no argument. Her name? Clara Jenkins. Her age? 27. How long had she worked at the Pinnacle? 3 years. Did she know the Sterlings? No, sir, she mumbled, her voice barely audible. I just served them their drinks. He took her details, handed her a crisp, heavy business card, and told her not to speak to the press. We will be in touch, he said. It was not a request. It was a statement of immutable fact. Clara was sent home, her shift abruptly over. The familiar L train ride back to her small Logan Square apartment was a blur. She shared the cramped two-bedroom space with her foster sister Mia, a bright, ambitious 20-year-old art history student at the University of Chicago. Clara wasn't just paying her own rent, she was shouldering the full weight of Mia's tuition and living expenses, a promise she had made to their beloved foster mother on her deathbed 3 years prior. That promise was the engine that drove her, the reason she worked double shifts and lived on a shoestring budget. Mia found her sitting on their lumpy second-hand sofa, staring blankly at the wall, her server's apron still tied around her waist. Clara, what happened? Mia asked, her young face crinkling with concern. The restaurant manager called, said there was an incident, and you got the rest of the night off. You look like you've wrestled a ghost. Clara recounted the story, her words tumbling out in a disjointed, incredulous stream. The elegant old woman, the cold billionaire, the grip on her arm, the impossible words, the collapse. Mia listened, her usual vibrant energy subdued by a growing sense of awe and worry. Whoa! You have my daughter's eyes. That's straight out of some gothic romance novel, Mia said, her eyes wide. Are you okay? That must have been absolutely terrifying. It was surreal, Clara said, absently rubbing her forearm. The way she looked at me, Mia, it wasn't just a compliment. It was like she was looking through me, at someone else. And the son, Edward, he looked at me and he just broke. He shattered. The next 48 hours were a tense, nerve-shredding limbo. Clara's phone buzzed with calls from her manager, who was being hounded by reporters. The story, though aggressively suppressed by the Sterling Corporation's formidable PR machine, was leaking out in whispers across the city's elite social circles. Billionaire Edward Sterling suffers massive coronary event at the Pinnacle. Mysterious waitress involved. The call from Benjamin Carter came the following afternoon. He requested a meeting, not at his gleaming office in the Sterling Tower, but at a discreet private suite in the Peninsula Hotel. The implication was clear. This was not a matter for public record. Against Mia's better judgment, this feels like you're walking into a spider's web, Clara. Be careful. She went. She wore her nicest blouse and a pair of slacks, trying to project a confidence she was nowhere near feeling. The suite was breathtaking, a world of muted silks and dark wood, with panoramic views of the city she could normally only see from the ground up. Eleanor Sterling was seated on a plush velvet sofa, looking smaller and infinitely more fragile than she had in the restaurant. Her grief was a palpable presence in the room, an almost physical weight. Benjamin Carter stood by the window, a sentinel in a gray suit. Miss Jenkins, Eleanor began, her voice hoarse but steady. Thank you for coming. Please sit. Clara sat stiffly on the edge of an armchair, her hands clasped in her lap. My son Edward is stable, Eleanor continued, her perfectly manicured hands folded. The doctors say the event was brought on by extreme emotional distress, a profound shock to his system. She paused, her pale violet-blue eyes locking onto Clara's. The shock, Miss Jenkins, was you. Clara swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. I'm very sorry for what happened to your son, but I truly don't understand. 28 years ago, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, I lost my daughter, Catherine. She was 22 years old, headstrong, brilliant, beautiful, full of life. She had a falling out with the family, with her father and Edward, about her future, about a man she was planning to marry. She walked out of our house one night and we never saw her again. The pain in her voice was so raw, so ancient, that Clara felt an involuntary pang of deep human sympathy. We hired investigators, Eleanor went on, her gaze turning to the window to the past. We spent a fortune. There were leads that went nowhere. Cruel, horrible hoaxes. After years, the police declared her legally dead. But I never believed it. A mother knows. I never felt it in my soul that she was gone from this earth. She leaned forward, her intensity returning, her eyes boring into Clara's. When I saw you the other night, I saw her. It wasn't just your eyes. It's everything. The way you stand, the shape of your face, the scar. She gestured toward Clara's collarbone. Catherine got that scar when she was 16, climbing an old oak tree on our property. She was the living image of my Catherine. Clara felt her head spin. This was impossible. A grieving mother's fantasy. Mrs. Sterling, this has to be a mistake. I was born in Wisconsin. I was raised in the foster system. My parents, I never knew them. They died in a car accident when I was a baby. That's all I've ever known. Is it? Benjamin Carter's voice cut in, smooth and sharp as cut glass. He stepped forward holding a thin manila file. We took the liberty of doing some preliminary research, Miss Jenkins. Your history is sparse. You entered the Illinois foster system at approximately 18 months old. The official report states you were found abandoned on the steps of a church in Evanston. The story of your parents dying in a car crash was something told to you by your first foster mother. There is no death certificate, no accident report, no record of a Jenkins couple who perished in that time frame and left behind an infant child. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. What are you saying? We are saying, Eleanor said, her voice trembling with the weight of her next words, her hand rising to her mouth, that we believe you are Catherine's daughter. We believe our daughter was pregnant when she disappeared. The air in the room grew thick, heavy with the enormity of the suggestion. Clara felt like she was drowning in the sheer improbability of it all. It was insane. It was a fairy tale concocted by a grieving, powerful family. That's impossible, she stammered. Is it? Carter countered, his gaze unwavering. Or is it an answer to a question you've had your entire life? He had her there. The faceless ghosts of her parents, the gnawing emptiness of not knowing her own story, of having no roots. It was the central void of her existence. Eleanor rose and walked over to Clara. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She didn't touch her, but stood so close Clara could smell the faint, elegant scent of lilacs from her perfume. We want to know the truth, Eleanor pleaded, her regal composure finally cracking. Tears welled in her violet blue eyes. I have to know. I am an old woman, Miss Jenkins. I have lived for almost 30 years in a gray, sunless world. You are the first ray of light I have seen. Please. The raw, unvarnished desperation in her voice was devastating. Clara looked from Eleanor's tear-streaked face to Benjamin Carter's impassive one. She knew what was coming next. We are prepared to make you an offer, Carter said, his tone all business again. Agree to a medically certified DNA test. While we await the results, which will be handled with the utmost discretion, we will deposit $500,000 into an account of your choosing. It is yours to keep, regardless of the outcome, to compensate you for this intrusion and to assist with your sister's educational needs. Clara stared at him, speechless. $500,000. It was a sum so vast it was abstract. It would solve every problem she had and a dozen she hadn't even thought of yet. It was Mia's entire future. Secure. It was freedom. It was a golden key to a different life. And if, Clara's voice was a dry rasp, if it's a match? Eleanor answered, her voice soft but laden with promise. If you are my granddaughter, you will never have to worry about anything ever again. You will be a Sterling. It wasn't just an offer. It was a temptation, a way out of the daily grind, and a possible answer to the question that had haunted her sleep for as long as she could remember. But it was also terrifying. To be a Sterling, to be part of this family of tragedy and immense, suffocating wealth. It was a gilded cage, and the door was swinging wide open. I need to think, she said, finally finding her voice. Of course, Carter said smoothly. Take 24 hours. He slid a piece of paper across a polished mahogany table. It was a non-disclosure agreement, and the terms of their offer, all laid out in neat, intimidating legalese. My number's at the bottom. I'll expect your call. Clara walked out of the hotel and back into the sunlight of her own world, feeling as if she had just visited another planet. In her pocket was a piece of paper that could change her life or condemn it. The rhythm of her life was no longer a steady beat. It was the frantic, terrifying crescendo of an orchestra reaching its climax. The next 24 hours were a sleepless, nerve-shredding ordeal. Clara sat with Mia in their tiny living room, the legal document spread on the coffee table between them like a sacred and terrifying text. $500,000? Just for a cheek swab? Mia whistled, her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and fear. Clara, that's insane. You could pay off my student loans, all of them. We could get a new apartment, a place with good heating. You could quit that stupid job. It's not about the money, Mia, Clara said, though the words felt hollow even to her. The money was a siren song, promising to solve the one problem that dictated every choice she made. Not really, it's, what if they're right? What does that even mean? My whole life, everything I thought I knew about myself would be a lie. Or, Mia countered gently, her artist's soul seeing a different angle, it would be the truth, the real truth. You've always felt like a puzzle with a missing piece. Maybe this is it. The allure of that missing piece of finally knowing was undeniable. The next day, with a trembling hand, Clara called Benjamin Carter and agreed. The process was swift and sterile, conducted at a private clinic that felt more like a luxury spa. A doctor with kind eyes and discreet manners met them. He took a swab from inside Clara's cheek and another from a willing, hopeful Eleanor. A sample from Edward, still recovering in a private wing of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, was provided by his medical team. The samples were sealed, labeled with anonymous codes, and dispatched to a top-tier genetics lab in Virginia. The results would take a week. During that week, Clara's life was suspended in a strange, surreal bubble. The Sterlings, true to their word, deposited the money. Seeing the number in her bank account felt like a typo. It didn't feel real. At their insistence, conveyed through Carter, she took a leave of absence from the Pinnacle. They didn't want her facing any more public scrutiny. Eleanor requested to see her again, not in a sterile hotel suite, but at the Sterling estate in Lake Forest, a sprawling mansion that looked more like a European palace than a home. Clara, feeling like an imposter in her best dress, agreed. She found Eleanor in a sunlit conservatory filled with orchids of every imaginable color. The old woman was weaker now, leaning on a silver-handled cane, but her eyes were bright with a nervous, hopeful energy. I wanted you to see this, Eleanor said, gesturing for Clara to follow her into a grand wood-paneled library. The walls were lined with thousands of books, but one wall was dedicated to family portraits. In the center was the large oil painting of a young woman with a defiant smile and storm-green eyes. That's my Catherine, Eleanor said softly, her hand hovering near the canvas as if she could feel her daughter's warmth. She was painted that the summer she turned 21. She hated sitting for it, said it was a stuffy tradition for stuffy people. Over the next few hours, Eleanor painted her own portrait of Catherine with words. She wasn't just a ghost or a name, she became a person. Catherine was brilliant, passionate, and rebellious. She clashed terribly with her father, a stern patriarch who had since passed away, and with her older brother, Edward. Edward always followed the path, Eleanor explained, a sad smile on her face. Princeton, Wharton, then into the family business. He understood rules, structure, legacy. Catherine, she wanted to smash the structure. She volunteered at inner-city art programs, protested corporate greed, sometimes her own family's, and she fell in love with a man we considered unsuitable. Who was he? Clara asked, captivated. His name was Marcus Thorne, Eleanor said, a flicker of old disapproval in her eyes. He was brilliant, charming, from a good family, an up-and-coming lawyer. On the surface, he was perfect, but he was intense, possessive. Edward approved of him, thought he could tame Catherine. My husband adored him. Her voice faltered. But Catherine, after a year, she wanted to end it. She told me he frightened her. The arguments were terrible. The last time I saw her, she had a terrible fight with Edward and her father. They told her she was throwing her life away, that Marcus was the perfect match. She screamed that she would rather die than be owned by him. She ran out of the house that night. Eleanor's voice broke. We thought she was being dramatic. We thought she'd cool off and call in a day or two. But she never did. The police had investigated Marcus Thorne, of course. He had a perfect alibi and seemed heartbroken, devastated. He had no idea where she went. He'd even helped fund the private investigation for the first year. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the story hanging between them. Clara looked at the portrait again, at the defiant young woman who might be her mother, a woman who had refused to be owned. She felt a strange kinship, a flicker of that same rebellious spark inside her own chest. As Clara was leaving, Eleanor pressed a small, velvet box into her hand. This was hers. I want you to have it. Back in her apartment, Clara opened it. Inside lay a delicate silver bracelet with a single, intricately carved charm. A tiny, perfect compass rose. It felt cool and solid in her hand, a tangible link to a past she was only just beginning to discover. Meanwhile, in his private hospital room, Edward Sterling was awake, lucid, and filled with a cold, simmering dread. The news of the DNA test had been brought to him by Benjamin Carter. Edward's reaction was not one of hope, but of deep, unsettling anger. "What have you done, Benjamin?" he rasped, his voice weak. Eleanor insisted. After seeing the girl, there's no denying the resemblance. "Resemblance isn't proof," Edward shot back, a flash of his old fire returning. "You've opened Pandora's box. Some things are better left buried." "Why?" Benjamin asked, his curiosity piqued by his boss's strange, almost fearful reaction. "If she is Catherine's daughter, she's family. She's your niece." Edward turned his head to stare out the window, his jaw tight. A shadow passed over his face, a flicker of an expression Benjamin had never seen on him before. Pure, unadulterated fear. "You don't understand," Edward said, his voice low and strained. "You have no idea what you've just unleashed." He wouldn't say more, retreating into a stony silence, leaving Benjamin to wonder what part of Catherine's story had been left out of the official family narrative. What was Edward Sterling so afraid of? The secret, it seemed, was not just that Catherine had a child. The secret was why she had run in the first place. And it was a secret Edward had been guarding for 28 years. The week of waiting for the DNA results felt like a lifetime stretched on a rack. Clara found herself living in a strange twilight world. No longer just a waitress, but not yet a Sterling. The money sat in her bank account, a figure so surreal it felt like play money. She paid Mia's tuition for the next 2 years in full and sent a generous check to her last foster mother, a kind woman in a nursing home who had always encouraged her to dream. For the first time in her adult life, the crushing weight of financial insecurity was gone, replaced by a new, more complicated anxiety, the weight of expectation. She spent most of her time in the library, devouring old newspapers on microfilm, searching for any mention of Catherine Sterling's disappearance. The stories were brief, sanitized. Prominent Chicago socialite vanishes. Family pleads for privacy. There was no mention of a fight, no mention of a fiancé named Marcus Thorne. The Sterling machine had scrubbed the narrative clean, even back then. But as the days ticked by, a new, unsettling feeling began to creep into Clara's life. It started small, the feeling of being watched as she walked to the corner store. A dark blue sedan parked across the street from her apartment building for 2 days straight, disappearing the moment she pointed out to Mia. "You're just paranoid," Mia said, though her eyes darted nervously toward the window. "This whole thing is messing with your head." Perhaps it was. But then one evening, as she was walking home from the library, a man in a dark business suit, a man who did not belong in her neighborhood, approached her on the sidewalk. He was handsome, in his late 50s, with silvering hair and a smile that was both charming and predatory. "Miss Jenkins?" he said, his voice smooth as velvet. Clara stopped, clutching her bag. "Do I know you?" "My name is Marcus Thorne," he said, extending a hand. "I was a dear friend of Catherine Sterling's. I heard about what happened at the restaurant. I just wanted to reach out and say, if you are who they think you are, I would be honored to meet you properly. Your mother was the most extraordinary woman I ever knew." The encounter was over in a minute, but it left Clara deeply shaken. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of something cold and calculating behind the charming facade, that made her skin crawl. When she described the man to Eleanor the next day, the old woman was surprised. "Marcus, he hasn't spoken to us in years. How strange that he would approach you." The incident that truly terrified her happened 2 nights later. She came home to find their apartment door unlocked. Her heart hammered as she pushed it open, calling Mia's name. Mia was fine, asleep in her room. Nothing was stolen, not the laptops, not the cash in her drawer. But when she went to her nightstand, the velvet box from Eleanor was open. The silver compass rose bracelet was gone. She told Benjamin Carter, her voice trembling over the phone. His reaction was immediate and serious. "The bracelet. Tell me everything Marcus Thorne said to you," he commanded. She recounted the brief, chilling conversation. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Benjamin? Clara, I'm sending a car. I want you and Mia to pack a bag. You'll be staying at the hotel until the results come in. The Sterling Suite, it's secure." "Isn't that an overreaction? It was just a stolen bracelet." "A man your mother was afraid of suddenly appears after 30 years, and then an item of hers with no monetary value is stolen from your locked apartment?" "No, I don't think it's an overreaction," Benjamin replied grimly. "Someone isn't just sending a message. They're looking for something." The move to the luxurious suite at the peninsula was jarring. 1 minute she was in her cozy, cluttered apartment. The next she was surrounded by marble, silk, and a level of security that was frankly terrifying. A plainclothes guard was stationed in the hall. Benjamin explained it was a precaution. His investigation, which had been a quiet background check, now kicked into high gear. He pulled the original, unredacted police file on Catherine's disappearance. Buried deep within the supplemental reports was a statement from one of Catherine's friends. She claimed that Catherine had broken off the engagement because she'd discovered something about Marcus, that his old money family was a sham, that he was involved in deeply shady financial schemes, and that he had a violent temper he kept hidden behind a mask of charm. The lead was never pursued with any vigor. The Sterlings and Marcus himself had steered the police focus toward the theory that Catherine had simply run away. A chilling theory began to form in Benjamin's mind. What if the family's narrative was wrong? What if Catherine wasn't running from her family, but from Marcus Thorne? The day the results were due, the atmosphere in the hotel suite was electric with tension. Eleanor arrived, her face pale, her hands trembling. Benjamin Carter stood by the window, his phone in his hand, waiting for the call from the lab's director. Clara just sat, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white, Mia's hand resting on her shoulder. The phone buzzed. Benjamin answered, his expression unreadable. He listened for a long moment, saying only, "Yes, and I understand." He hung up and turned to face the three women. He took a deep breath. "The results are in," he said, his gaze settling on Clara. "The mitochondrial DNA is a perfect maternal line match to Eleanor Sterling." He paused, letting the words sink in. "It is a 99.999% probability," he declared, his voice leaving no room for doubt. "Clara Jenkins, you are the daughter of Catherine Sterling." A choked sob escaped Eleanor's lips. She sagged with relief, tears of joy streaming down her face as she reached a trembling hand towards Clara. "My granddaughter," she wept. "My dear, dear girl." But Clara barely heard her. Her world had just tilted on its axis. It was true. All of it. The portrait, the eyes, the scar. She was a Sterling. The puzzle piece had been slammed into place, and the picture it created was overwhelming. She was no longer an orphan, a girl from nowhere. She had a history, a lineage, a family. And in that moment of stunning revelation, another piece clicked into place. The feeling of being watched, Marcus Thorne's sudden appearance, the thief who stole not money, but a memory. It wasn't about the Sterlings trying to find her. It was about someone who was terrified of her being found. Her appearance hadn't just dredged up a family's grief. It had disturbed a much darker, more dangerous secret. She looked at Benjamin, whose grim expression told her he had reached the same conclusion. "Someone tried to keep this a secret, didn't they?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "It's him, isn't it? Marcus Thorne. What is he so afraid of?" The joy of discovery was instantly tempered by the cold chill of fear. Finding her family, it seemed, was only the beginning of the story. The real danger lay in uncovering why she was lost in the first place. The confirmation of Clara's identity sent ripples through the Sterling Corporation, but the most profound impact was felt in the sterile quiet of Edward Sterling's private hospital room. Benjamin Carter delivered the news in person. He expected a complex reaction, but not the one he received. Edward didn't show a flicker of joy or surprise. Instead, a heavy sigh escaped his lips, a sound of profound weariness, as if a sentence he had been dreading for years had finally been handed down. He closed his eyes, his face a mask of grim resignation. "So, it's true," he whispered. "She's here, Edward." "This is wonderful news," Benjamin began. But Edward cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. "No, Benjamin, it's not. It's a reckoning." He struggled to sit up, his movements stiff. "Get my mother on the phone, and the girl. Clara, bring her here, now. There's something they both need to know. Something I should have said 28 years ago." An hour later, Clara and Eleanor were ushered into the hushed atmosphere of the hospital room. Seeing Edward up close without his armor of corporate power was a shock. He looked older, smaller, haunted by something far deeper than his recent health scare. His gaze fell on Clara, and for the first time she saw not a cold billionaire, but a man drowning in regret. "Mother," he began, his voice raspy. "Clara, I have not been honest about the day Catherine left." Eleanor stiffened. "What are you talking about, Edward? You and your father had that terrible argument with her about Marcus." "We did argue," he confirmed, his eyes fixed on a point on the far wall. "It was the worst one we ever had. Father and I, we were pushing her to marry Marcus Thorne. We saw him as an asset, a connection that would solidify our power." He paused, swallowing hard. "But that's not why she ran. Not entirely." The silence in the room was absolute. "She came to my study later that night," Edward confessed, his voice dropping, thick with shame. "Long after you and Father had gone to bed. She was crying. She looked terrified. She told me she had discovered something about Marcus. His family's money was a lie. He was deeply in debt to some very dangerous people. He was using his position at his law firm to facilitate money laundering. She said she had proof. She had copied files from his home office." Clara's blood ran cold. The man who had approached her on the street, the charming friend of the family. "She said Marcus knew she had it," Edward continued, his voice trembling. "He had threatened her. He told her if she went to the police, or to us, he would not only expose some of Father's more aggressive business dealings, but he would make her disappear. She was petrified. She didn't know what to do." "So she came to you," Eleanor breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. Edward nodded, a single tear tracing a path down his gaunt cheek. "She came to me, her big brother. And what did I do? I didn't believe the extent of it. I thought she was being dramatic, exaggerating to get out of the engagement. I saw Marcus as a rival, an operator, but not a monster. I told her to give me the proof and I would handle it. I would use it as leverage, to control him, to benefit the company." He squeezed his eyes shut, the memory of fresh, agonizing wound. "But she wouldn't. She said she didn't trust me. She said I only cared about business and power, that I would bury it to protect the family name. She said she needed to disappear to get away before he could find her. She begged me for money, cash, enough to start a new life somewhere far away." This was the moment that had haunted him, the decision that had broken him. "And I refused," he choked out. "I called her a foolish, hysterical girl. I told her to go back to Marcus and be the dutiful fiancé. I thought I was protecting the family from scandal, from her melodrama." His last words to her, he confessed, were cold and cruel. "Stop being a child, Catherine, and do what's best for this family for once in your life." He looked directly at Clara, his defenses completely gone. "She walked out of that door and I never saw her again. For 28 years, I let you all believe she ran away because of a tantrum. But the truth is, I pushed her away. I sent her into the night, alone and terrified, running from a man I underestimated. I didn't protect her. I chose the business over my own sister." The reason for his collapse in the restaurant was suddenly brutally clear. It wasn't just the shock of seeing a ghost. It was the crushing, instantaneous weight of his failure. In Clara's face, he hadn't just seen his lost sister. He had seen the living embodiment of his guilt, the proof that Catherine hadn't just run away. She had been a terrified mother-to-be, and he had sent her into the jaws of danger. Eleanor let out a gut-wrenching sob, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish. Not just for a lost daughter, but for a terrified one she never knew she had. Clara stood frozen, the pieces of her life slotting into a horrifying mosaic. Her mother wasn't a reckless runaway. She was a woman in fear for her life, trying to protect her unborn child. She hadn't abandoned her. She had been running to save her. And the man she was running from, Marcus Thorne, was still out there. A powerful, ruthless man who now knew that Catherine Sterling's daughter, the one loose end he probably thought was long gone, had just been found. The theft of the bracelet wasn't a warning. It was a promise. He was coming to finish what he started. "Benjamin," Clara said, her voice cutting through the family's grief with newfound clarity and strength. "The robbery, the bracelet. He wasn't just sending a message. He's looking for the proof my mother had." Edward's head snapped up, a new kind of fear for Clara, eclipsing his guilt. "My God," he whispered, "what have I done?" He hadn't just opened Pandora's box. He had painted a target on his niece's back. Edward Sterling's confession transformed the landscape of the mystery. It was no longer a family tragedy, it was a criminal investigation. The full, terrifying resources of the Sterling Corporation, which had once been used to suppress the story, were now unleashed to uncover the truth and destroy Marcus Thorne. Edward, energized by a potent cocktail of guilt and a desperate need for redemption, directed the operation from his hospital bed, his mind as sharp and ruthless as ever. Benjamin Carter became his field marshal. He hired a team of the best private investigators money could buy. Ex-FBI agents, forensic accountants, digital security experts, who operated with surgical precision. Their target, Marcus Thorne. They worked out of a secure suite in the Sterling Tower, the walls quickly covered in timelines, photographs, and connection charts. Clara was at the center of it all. She was no longer a passive participant. The vague, wispy feelings of her forgotten childhood began to coalesce into something more tangible as she was surrounded by the details of her mother's life. "The compass," she told Benjamin one afternoon, staring at a photo of the stolen bracelet. "I remember the smell of salt and wood, like an old pier, and a song, a lullaby." While the investigation raged, Clara focused on the personal. With Eleanor, she went through boxes of Catherine's belongings that had been stored in the mansion's attic for decades. They found diaries filled with angry, passionate poetry, sketchbooks, and photo albums. As they flipped through a worn leather album, Clara's breath caught. She pointed to a candid snapshot. Catherine was in the foreground, laughing, but behind her, leaning against a vintage car, was a handsome, smiling Marcus Thorne. "She looks so happy there," Eleanor said sadly, but Clara wasn't looking at their faces. She was looking at the background. It was a small lakeside town. A distinctive sign for a diner, the Salty Gull, was visible over Marcus's shoulder. "I know this place," Clara whispered, a jolt of memory, powerful and visceral, shooting through her. The smell of the pier. The investigators cross-referenced the photo with properties owned by the Sterlings and Marcus Thorne 28 years ago. They found it, a small, forgotten lake house in a tiny Michigan resort town owned by the Thorne family. It had been sold a year after Catherine disappeared. As they were digging, a package arrived at the hotel for Clara. It was a small padded envelope with no return address. The security team scanned it and found nothing dangerous. Inside was a single old tarnished key and a small folded piece of paper. On the paper was a child's drawing of a sun and a handwritten note. "From your first friend," it read. It was signed Mrs. Gable. The name resonated with Benjamin. He found her in their files. Martha Gable, a former housekeeper for the Sterlings, who had quit suddenly around the time Catherine disappeared. They tracked her down to a nursing home in suburban Illinois. Clara and Benjamin went immediately. Mrs. Gable was frail, her memory clouded, but when she saw Clara, her eyes lit up with a flicker of recognition. Catherine's girl, she whispered, her hand trembling as she touched Clara's cheek. She told them a fragmented story. Catherine had come to her in the middle of the night, terrified. She gave her a bag of cash, the money Edward had refused her, and a baby. My baby. She made Martha promise to disappear, to raise the child, to keep her safe. The story of the car crash was a fiction they had concocted to protect Clara. She gave me the key, Mrs. Gable whispered, her eyes drifting. She said, if anything happens to me, the compass will lead her home. The picture was now terrifyingly complete. Catherine, betrayed by her brother, had turned to the one person she trusted. She gave her baby to Martha and then, alone and desperate, she must have gone to confront Marcus, to try to get her proof back or to bargain for her daughter's safety. And she had never been seen again. The investigators, armed with this new information, descended on the Michigan Lake House. The new owners were cooperative. The key Clara had received from Mrs. Gable opened a small hidden safe in the floor of a closet. Inside was a small metal box, and inside the box lay Catherine Sterling's revenge. It wasn't just ledgers. It was a series of photographic negatives and a small, handwritten journal detailing Marcus Thorne's criminal activities and his violent, terrifying threats against her. Her final entry was chilling. He knows about the baby. I'm going to meet him at the pier. He says we can make a deal. I don't believe him. This is for you, my little Clara. The compass will lead you to the truth. Be brave. There was no longer any doubt. Marcus Thorne hadn't just threatened Catherine. He had lured her to a meeting and silenced her forever. Just as Benjamin was relaying this information over the phone to a horrified Edward, his lead investigator burst into the suite. We have a problem, he said, his face grim. Thorne's off the grid. His jet filed a flight plan for a private strip in Wisconsin, but it never landed. And our surveillance on your sister Clara, she just left her dorm. She got into a town car. The license plate is registered to a shell corporation owned by Marcus Thorne. Clara, overhearing, felt a paralyzing, white-hot fear. Mia. He had Mia. Unable to get to Clara in her fortress, he was going to use the only person in the world she loved as bait. The drive to the prearranged meeting spot, the old derelict pier by the Michigan Lake House, was a blur of dread and icy resolve. Marcus Thorne had made his demand clear, the box and everything in it, in exchange for Mia. No police, just Clara, alone. It was an obvious trap. Edward and Benjamin had vehemently protested, but Clara was unmovable. This is my fight, she had said, her voice echoing the defiant spirit of the mother she never knew. He wants to finish what he started with her, but he's going to finish it with me. They devised a plan, a desperate gamble. The pier was long and isolated, surrounded by water on three sides. A tactical team would approach by boat, under the cover of the murky twilight. Edward, his face a mask of grim determination, would be with them. Clara would wear a wire and a GPS tracker. It was an incredible risk, but it was the only way. Clara walked the length of the creaking wooden pier, the metal box heavy in her hands. The air was cold, smelling of damp wood and fish. At the far end, silhouetted against the dying light, stood Marcus Thorne. Mia was beside him, her hands bound, her eyes wide with terror. Clara, Thorne purred as she approached, I'm so glad you could make it. You have your mother's stubbornness. It was her undoing, you know. Let her go, Marcus, Clara said, her voice steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. He sneered, his handsome face twisting into an ugly mask of arrogance. All in good time. First the box. Your mother was foolish. She thought this silly little collection of papers could stop me. All it did was get her killed. He was trying to poison Catherine's memory, to frame her as a naive fool. But Clara felt only a surge of cold, clarifying rage. She looked him in the eye, her voice clear and strong. My mother was brave, she said, delivering the prearranged distress signal. She knew you were a monster, and now everyone else is going to know it too. Thorne laughed and revealed a pistol, pressing it discreetly to Mia's side. It's over when I say it is. In that instant, the world erupted. From the dark water below, the silent boats of the tactical team roared to life, their spotlights flooding the pier with blinding light. FBI, drop your weapon! A voice boomed through a megaphone. Mia, seizing the moment, stomped hard on Thorne's foot and threw herself to the side, away from the gun. Thorne snarled and raged, raising his weapon not at the approaching officers, but at Clara, a final, desperate act of spite. Before he could fire, a single deafening shot echoed from the end of the pier. But it wasn't from the tactical team. Edward Sterling stood there, flanked by Benjamin, a handgun held steady in his hands. Thorne crumpled, clutching a wound in his shoulder, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. "That," Edward said, his voice flat with the finality of a 28-year-old debt being paid, "was for my sister." In the aftermath, Marcus Thorne's empire, built on a foundation of lies and murder, crumbled. Faced with the overwhelming evidence from Catherine's box and Edward's testimony, he confessed everything. He led them to where he had buried Catherine's body, beneath the floorboards of the old lake house. Catherine Sterling, no longer a vanished socialite, but a courageous mother who had died to protect her child and expose a criminal, was finally laid to rest with the honor she deserved, beside the father who had never known her. Life for Clara was irrevocably changed. She was an heiress, a public figure, a Sterling, but the wealth was secondary to her purpose. She used her newfound resources to establish the Catherine's Compass Foundation, a powerful charity dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and helping women and children escape abusive situations. The Sterling family was not magically healed. The wounds were too deep, the guilt too profound. But it was, for the first time in nearly 3 decades, whole. Edward found a measure of redemption, not in building skyscrapers, but in helping Clara build her foundation, channeling his formidable power into a force for good. And Eleanor, in her final years, found peace, not in her vast fortune, but in the presence of her granddaughter, the living legacy of her daughter's brave, defiant heart. Clara, finally understanding her past, was no longer a ghost of her mother, but a testament to her courage. She was home. This incredible story shows us that the past is never truly gone. It lives on in the secrets we keep, in the faces of strangers, and in the undeniable pull of family. Clara's journey from a humble waitress to the heir of a powerful legacy is a testament to the fact that our identity is so much more than our circumstances. It's a story of a mother's ultimate sacrifice, a family's painful reckoning with the truth, and the discovery that finding where you come from can finally show you where you're meant to go. If this story of fate, secrets, and the unbreakable bond of family touched your heart, please let us know in the comments below. What part of the story shocked you the most? Your engagement helps our channel grow and bring more stories like this to light. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a story of profound mystery and emotion, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss our next incredible real-life drama. Thank you for listening.